Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Occult Think Tank. My name is Greg. In this program, I am going to be talking about nothing versus absolute nothing. And I'll be doing this from a scientific perspective. Since I'm not a physicist and wouldn't even try to pretend to be one, I'm going to be treating this much like I did the First Testament of the Illuminati and reading a scientific paper, a paper written by an actual physicist, explaining what is meant by nothing in science. I will be giving my commentary on it at the end. The four scientific meanings of nothing. When we look around at our world and universe today, we talk and think about the things that are in it. These range from particles, atoms, and human beings to planets, stars, galaxies, and the largest structures of all. Depending on what we're interested in, we might discuss gas, dust, radiation, black holes, or even dark matter. But all the things we see, observe, or infer the existence of today might not have been there forever. Some of these arose from pre-existing matter that was around previously, but others seemingly came from nothing. Unsurprisingly, not everyone agrees about what we mean scientifically when we talk about what nothing actually is. Depending on who you ask, or when you ask them, you might get one of four separate meanings. Here are why they are all relevant. Number one, a time when your thing of interest didn't exist. How did the universe make planets? How about stars? How about a matter asymmetry? These things didn't always exist, but rather had to be created. When the mechanism is known, we normally say that our thing was created from something rather than nothing. Planets came from the recycled detritus of previous generations of stars, where the heavy elements comprising their cores and solid surfaces were created and then expelled back into the stellar medium. Stars come from contracting clouds of gas which contain regions that get dense enough and hot enough to ignite nuclear fission. Both planets and stars are matter that come from pre-existing forms of matter. They're a thing that comes from something rather than nothing. But matter we have today didn't come from pre-existing matter. At some point in the distant past, the universe was comprised of equal amounts of matter and antimatter. The laws of physics were discovered only enable us to create them in equal amounts. Yet the universe we have today is overwhelmingly made of matter, not antimatter. Where every one of the billions upon billions of galaxies we know of are made of matter, not antimatter, where did our matter asymmetry come from? From a previous symmetric state? From a state where matter and antimatter existed in equal amounts? From a time when there was no asymmetry? According to some, this means that the matter we have today arose from nothing, although others who adhere strictly to one of the other definitions dispute this. Still, no one disputes that the scientific problem of baryogenesis, or the origin of matter, antimatter symmetry, is one of the most pressing puzzles in theoretical physics today. Many ideas and mechanisms abound for how our matter and not antimatter came to exist, but we're lacking the evidence required to declare a victor. Number two, empty space. Think of all the things that exist in the universe today. Think of every fundamental continuity of matter, every quantum of radiation, every black hole, every mass, every particle and antiparticle. Now imagine removing them all. Imagine somehow taking them out of the universe, leaving nothing but empty space behind. What would you have left? Some call that nothing, and are quite happy with that definition. The entity known as space-time is still there, as there are laws of physics, all the fields present within empty space, from the Higgs field to the gravitational fields to the quantum fields that we often visualize as particle-antiparticle pairs, popping in and out of existence, are still around. Physical laws like quantum field theory are still there. General relativity is still around. And the fundamental constants are not only still there, but have the same values they do today. And the vacuum of empty space itself still has 0-point energy. That's non-zero. This manifests itself as dark energy today, and with a very different non-zero value in the distant past, was the driving force behind the cosmological inflation. When people talk about the universe arising from nothing, this is the type of nothing they're referencing. The hot Big Bang being birthed by inflation. Number 3, empty space-time in the lowest energy state possible. What if the 0-point energy of the universe were reduced to its true ground state when inflation came to an end? There would go a huge drop in the universe's vacuum energy, from the inflation scale to the value it has today. That drop in energy of empty space was responsible for the massive increase in particle energy and the origin of the hot Big Bang. But there is no guarantee that we're in the true lowest energy state right now. It's possible that we're merely in a false vacuum state, and the true vacuum state awaits us after another catastrophic, universe-altering transition. If you reached whatever the true ground state is, and expelled all the matter, energy, radiation, and space-time ripples from your universe, what would you be left with? That is perhaps the ultimate idea of what physical nothingness can be, where you still have a stage of the universe to play out on. There may be no players, no cast, no script, and no scene, but the great abyss of nothingness. You still have a stage. The cosmic vacuum would be at its minimum. There would be no hope of extracting work, energy, or real particles from this vacuum. But space-time and the laws of physics would still be around. In theory, if you added a particle to this universe, it wouldn't be so different from an isolated particle existing in our universe today. Number 4, whatever you're left with when you take away the entire universe and the laws governing it. At last you can conceive of removing everything, including space, time, and the rules that govern any sort of particles or quanta of energy. This creates a type of nothing that physicists have no definition for. This goes beyond nothing, as it exists in the universe, instead of realizing some sort of philosophical absolute nothingness. But in the context of physics, we cannot make sense of this sort of nothingness. We'd have to assume that there is such a thing as a state outside of space and time, where you can have the emergence of space-time from this hypothesized state of true nothingness. But is that possible? How does space-time emerge at a particular location when there's no such thing as space? How can you create the beginning of time if there's no concept of something like before, without time already existing? And where, then, would the rules governing particles and their interactions arise from? Does this final definition of nothing even mean anything at all? Or is it just a logical construct with no physical meaning of its own? There is no consensus here. With language having the ambiguity it does, you can say nothing and legitimately be referring to any of these, with the purists eagerly waiting to yell at you if you dare use nothing in a context that is less pure than their definition. If something fundamentally arose where there was no such thing before, you can call it nothing, but not everyone will agree. If you take all the matter, antimatter, radiation, and even spatial curvature away, you can certainly lay a claim to that being what nothing is all about. But there are some things that are still around. If you take away all energy inherent to space itself, leaving only space-time and the laws of nature, you can call that nothing as well. But philosophically, some people will be dissatisfied. Only by taking away that as well will some finally acquiesce to calling such an entity nothing. So who is right? They all are in their own way. The key isn't to argue or fight over what nothing truly is, but to accept and understand these differences as people use them. It's paramount to not confuse one meaning for another, or to get into a squabble over why it's wrong to use a word in a particular manner. Instead, when someone, particularly a scientist, says the word nothing, try and understand which meaning they're using and what the phenomenon is they're trying to explain. For as far as our imaginations can take us, the only true form of knowledge we can hope to have concerning anything at all relies on putting it to the test in our own physical reality. Everything else, no matter how logically sound, is merely a construct of our minds. Creationists like Ray Comfort would jump all over the phrase "rather had to be created" and be screaming, see, that means you have to have a creator. No, it doesn't. They are showing that they are taking what is being said completely out of context. Just because the word created is used does not mean that the scientist is talking about it came from some invisible magical force, because everything that follows it explains the mechanism by which we know how things were created in that term. Not that it came from anything anthropomorphic, but rather that it is aspects of nature and the natural process that occurs in the universe with recycling debris from previous stars and other elements being used to form another object, be it a planet, a star, whatnot. That's what they're talking about when they say something is created. Not that it comes from a magical source, but that it is created by the debris from pre-existing matter. Just like the creationists wouldn't try acting as if space-time is an entity, even though in part 2 it says the entity known as space-time. The creationists would not look at that and be trying to act as if now there has to be God versus Satan versus space-time. They wouldn't be taking and jumping on the entity known as space-time because that doesn't fit their paradigm. This is what they're doing. They cherry pick what the scientist says, looking for buzzwords like created. They want to find buzzwords, just like when they're looking at the Old Testament, they will look for buzzwords to try and link their Jesus to the Old Testament. Buzzwords are what they're interested in, not the context of how a word is used or what is being talked about. It isn't until part 4 that the scientist gets into what could be termed the creationist's idea of nothing, where they want to take away and act like absolute nothing is where things come from. But absolute nothing, as far as science is concerned, is more of a philosophical idea, not something that you can tangibly prove. Because there is no example you could give of absolute nothing. Any Christian that doesn't believe this, in the comments section, give me an example of absolute nothing. Because what I contend is any example of absolute nothing that you would try to define would have something to it. Because even if you want to try and insert your God into that, the God would still be something. Your God would not be absolute nothing, or you're admitting your God does not exist. Because if a God exists, even that is something, not nothing. So the idea of God always was, if you can't have something from nothing, where did God come from? Because God has to be, at the very least, something. And going by Christian logic, you can't get something from nothing. Where did God come from? You don't get to say that your God always was without considering and leaving open the idea that perhaps the universe always was, or the seeds for what the universe could be always were. That the idea of absolute nothing is impossible. I'm not doing this as any type of gotcha for Christians. I just want everyone to be aware of what nothing actually means scientifically. And that the idea of absolute nothing is only a thought exercise. There is no example that can be given of absolute nothing. At least not in what we term the tangible, measurable, real world. But feel free to leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section. Later, people.